One of the cool things about making this movie was watching the way your process actually, which is pretty unique to what I've seen.
That's a kind word for it.
Process is you cut up to camera every day, basically. You take the day before's footage and you edit the movie as you go, which is pretty unusual.
That's not abnormal, right?
Well, I've never seen it.
I mean, you've made many more movies than we have, but on any of the other films that we've made, traditionally...
Usually you get to the end of shooting, there's a big pile, and then 2 weeks later, it's been assembled.
Well, certainly Stephen Marioni and I, when we've worked together, have made it a point of being as close to camera as possible. You know, as you remember also, we were reshooting stuff as we were shooting because we would see stuff assembled and say, we need another shot of this.
The big positive of that, too, as writers on set is when we would watch scenes cut together, if a piece of information was dropped, you go, oh, well, we can put that in scene 172.
Exactly, right.
Or the character, I see that, you know, the takes you chose at this point make the character appear a certain way. We better marry that to something else later or set something up earlier. And without sort of being caught up and having scenes cut, you can't do that. You have to do it all later.
Well, I feel like if you're able to set up a circumstance where you can do that, it does. The shooting is more, I don't know what the right word is, alive, or at least the movie is continually evolving in front of you, and you have the opportunity, like you said, to say, hey, based on what we just saw cut, why don't we make an adjustment in this later scene because it seems to be drifting in this direction instead of that direction.
And it also just felt like a real extension of the process that we started
when we were writing.
When we were working together writing the script, because we would write passes, send them to you, you'd kick them back to us, shift stuff around, almost as if you were editing the movie at the script stage. And so the whole process felt really incredibly fluid.
If you have a character that legitimately needs to be told what's going on, that's better than having characters who know each other sort of telling each other things that when you watch you go, well, they would already know that. They don't need to talk to each other like that. I mean, to me it's a good premise to explain what's happening.
Yeah, it's a good device. And because one of the difficult balancing acts in a movie like this, if I can use an expression like balancing act without you guys making fun of me.
The question is whether you should use the word difficult.
Or movie.
But one of those things is figuring out in a con movie how much to reveal and when. You want to reveal enough that people are engaged, but you don't want to reveal so much that they're bored beyond their naturally being bored because you're bad at executing what you're trying to execute.
Right.
When we started working, this was a great thing, and I think probably I would have been interested to hear this. Part of the way you work, Stephen, is, right, when you're thinking about making a movie even years before, any ideas that you have, like, even if they're not connected specifically to story, you'll write them down and collect them in these notebooks. And so we would come in the beginning, we would come out to LA.
We were just sort of,
we were just spitballing
went through the list.
ideas, and you just kind of went down all these different, primarily visual ideas or like a punchline, disconnected things that I think more than half of which.
Really, I feel like it was, 20%, because a lot of them get kicked out quickly once you've got the story and you realize that we're just not going there.
I don't want people to think that you encourage
improvisation.
To go willy-nilly.
Absolutely not. No. All of this was very, very. There isn't a breath or a head turn that I don't think that's not indicated in the script. And actors like that. Again, I'm always looking for opportunities, if possible, to play scenes in as few cuts as I can.
Why?
I think when I'm watching... Thanks for asking. When I'm watching a movie, I want to see there should be some part of it within a scene or within the movie overall that looked like it was hard, that looked like it required some amount of skill or proficiency or difficulty. You know what I mean? I want to see stuff that I look at and go, that doesn't look easy.
That's interesting. I was reading in David Mamet's book that just came out, Bambi versus Hollywood. He was saying that it really bothers him.
Godzilla.
Bambi versus Godzilla. He was saying it really bothers him when, if an actor's playing piano, you go down and show the actor's hands, because he feels you're trying to show, that is difficult, and that takes away from the story. You find that it's interesting if there's a level of sort of artisanship at play, right?
Well, I feel like
as long as it
if
serves
I
the-
watch a movie where I look like, if I watch a movie in which basically every shot and every scene looks like it was executed with a minimum of effort, that bugs me. That's different from making a movie that's simple. I'm just saying there's got to be some aspect of the movie, whether it was in the writing or whether there's got to be some aspect of it that I think that was hard. Like that was hard.
You grade on difficulty points a little bit.
Yeah, because
You refute Mr. Mamet's assertion.
Well, I'm just saying that could be because this is my job, and I feel like I can tell when somebody's dogging it,
Right.
and that bugs me because most people I know go to work and they're killing themselves to come up with something that they feel is interesting and alive. And so if I feel like somebody goes, hey, you know, the easiest thing to do is just put the camera there and turn it this way and then turn it that way.
That's what you don't want to do.
Well, I just feel like then...
And how do you think the
that's
actors...
That's not directing to me. That's not filmmaking
How do you
to me.
think the actors feel about trying to execute, like,
when
these
they
physical
understand
moves
when they
within a
understand
shot?
the payoff, they're happy. The
They
other
like
thing
the
is you have to
challenge.
remember they love playing scenes all the way through because
Right.
they get a rhythm going as
Right.
performers. You ask any act, that was one of the things.
I want to go back to one thing because I think it's interesting that you said, but you would say, or a question is, but you don't want the viewer to be sucked out of the drama of the scene to notice the sort of bravura
Exactly.
camera work,
Yeah.
right? You
I
want
don't
that
want
to be
them
the
to-
kind of thing
yeah.
that maybe shows up the third time that they watch the
Right.
film. I'm asking, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And not that I'm going to sit here and say that there are shots in this movie that you know, if you're a filmmaker, are going to make you envious. But I'm just saying.
When you're shooting, it's funny, people think what the life of a triple A-list Hollywood director is.
You are.
And, well, they want to know what the life is like, and they assume it's filled with parties and showgirls. But there would be many nights...
But when that isn't happening, I'm
There'd be
thinking
many
about
nights
the movie.
when one would call you, and this might have just been your dodge to not have to hang out with the writers, but where you would say, I have to go do my homework.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we were writing the movie, you would say that when you were in prep. And, you know, what's clear is that you really do your homework, that you come in with pages of notes for each of these scenes.
Well, certainly when we're prepping, I'm going through the script. If I have any ideas at all, I'm writing them down. When we're shooting, every night, I watch.
You don't
I
storyboard.
watch a cut of whatever we've got assembled so far, a minimum of 3 times a week, sometimes more. And I'm looking at it, trying to determine if there's anything else that needs to be done to it. Also, you know, even though these films have a certain grammar to them visually, you still, as you shoot them and you're doing scenes, the specificity of that grammar becomes more and more apparent, which is why I keep watching what we've done to make sure that what I'm doing is linking up. But every night, you know, I watch the stuff, usually silent, to think about how we're going to do tomorrow, or how we're going to, you know, I like to, if I want to feel really secure, I'll try and do like a week's worth of notes about what we're shooting that week. And then every night sort of refine
Tune
it.
it up. And you don't storyboard.
No.
And do you ever, like, write down camera positions or based on your set or diagram, anything?
If I have a very specific idea, I might. But it's rare. I usually want to wait until I see the actors in the space before I make a real decision about it.
You want to let them find it as opposed to telling them where to stand and what to do.
Yeah, even though I think this is a really pretentious theory.
Well, break it out.
Okay, here we go. To my mind, there's subjective directing and there's objective directing. Subjective directing is when you're creating images in which you are obviously aware of the outcome already. You're designing shots in which the
create some
director
effect.
knows
Right.
what the scene is before you've seen the scene. Objective directing is a style of directing in which it would seem as though you're shooting in such a way to indicate you don't know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? So subjective directing would be a 3-minute dialogue scene in which somebody at the end of it takes a a drink of water that has some relevance, and they put it down on the table as the camera lands just in the right place to give it a certain prominence. That's a subjective scene because you knew going in that scene was about the glass of water.
And you choose what?
And you're choosing to...
I'm saying, which do you prefer?
It depends on the script.
Right.
An Ocean's movie, to me, for me to pretend... Although there are scenes in here that are shot in a sort of sloppy handheld
No,
style.
but I was thinking of the light being turned on in the scene at the beginning. When you cut
Right.
to England.
Right.
And that's a subjective. It's clear that you built that thing to get to that moment.
Right.
Or landing on the VUP's
Can I just-
room number.
So again, we've got Alan George. I don't want to get into an over-the-shoulder situation. We have a big location with a lot of extras and activity going on that I feel, if you have all these elements and you're not using them in the frame and making it seem like George and Al are really there and this is really, then, what are you doing? Like, take advantage of all of the things that you have. So, we shot a few takes of this because they have, a few lines of dialogue.
Did this approach evolve for you? Because I've heard you talk before about at one point being more of a formalist, and that where do you think
Which
you're
I
going
used
on
as
that?
a pejorative. I felt
Yes.
that was not a good thing.
Yeah, right. I'm saying that, yes. But where do you see that sort of tracking out as you're thinking about your next films? Do you see yourself continuing off?
I think the best of all possible worlds is to be able to, again, you prepare, but to be able to call on, to have all this RAM available, all this, all of your ideas sort of online as you're watching the scene sort of take shape in front of you for the first time, and being able to determine in the moment what's the best way to accomplish this, given the general aesthetic that I've established for the movie. And usually, for me, it's less about what you're allowed to do, but more about what you shouldn't do, what kind of shots you're not allowed to do, what kind of equipment you're not allowed to use. Giving yourself very specific parameters, like being disciplined about, this is how we're doing this. So,
Like Jack White deciding, no bass on this album.
exactly. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stephen, you said something really interesting, which is, yeah, you did, that the key is not repeating shots in this sort of a montage, but what you really said a few times on set actually is, isn't that sort of your approach to scenes in general?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I think that might be worth talking about. Have you talked about that on commentaries before?
No, not a lot. I mean,
Right, well, even when you're covering
even
a
within
scene,
coverage?
Yeah, my goal, if there's a way to never repeat a shot that isn't annoying, like for instance the scene we were talking about in the hotel room with Benedict, where Matt says, I can seduce Sponder, that scene.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm obviously repeating angles in there, because if I didn't, the scene goes on for so long, the angles that I would have to come up with to keep staying new would get increasingly absurd.
But for you, like the platonic ideal of a scene
is that you never repeat a shot.
scene that doesn't repeat, that
Unless-
starts with a certain that somehow builds in a way that seems inevitable and never repeats.
Yes, unless you've got a scene that I would call a strict interrogation, in which case the power of repeating a shot.
in the quicker cuts.
No,
perhaps.
I'm just talking about you and I are having a scene together, and it's a confrontation or an interrogation or something, or a seduction. And
Obviously, you'll be using a stunt double. For,
I guess.
yes, so an intense one-on-one
in which
scene.
repeating the shots becomes
It builds it.
important. You know what I mean? There's a tension that comes from actually
Right.
being very obvious about the fact that you keep going back to these same two shots.
But that's the exception for you.
Yes.
That's to heighten a particularly dramatic
Yes.
moment.
But in a scene like this, especially, in my book, if you're repeating shots, you're not doing your homework. Like, every shot should be new.